All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're looking at Kenyan politics.
Specifically, the Ruto administration.
Yeah, and how people are feeling about it.
And we've got a good source to use, actually.
Oh.
Remember that interview you sent with Kimani Ichung'wah on Al Jazeera's Head-to-Head?
Oh, yeah, the one where Mehdi Hassan really grilled him?
Yeah.
It was a pretty big deal over there, right?
Yeah, he's Ruto's right-hand man.
And the majority leader in the Kenyan National Assembly.
Exactly.
And the interview gets intense.
Yeah, they get into allegations of corruption, police brutality, pretty heavy stuff.
So what was your big takeaway from the interview? What really stood out?
You know how President Ruto ran on this whole platform of change?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of Kenyans are frustrated because a lot of those promises haven't happened.
Yeah, there's actually numbers to back that up.
Oh, really?
A nonpartisan organization found that only 14 out of 281 campaign promises have been fulfilled.
Wow.
Now, because he and you and your party haven't delivered for the people of Kenya. Your 2022 election manifesto made 281 promises. Can you tell our audience tonight how many of those have been fulfilled over the last 2.5 years?
That's not a great track record.
No, not at all.
And it makes you think about, the trust between the government and the people.
Yeah, the growing trust deficit for sure.
Especially when you listen to Ichung'wah's answers in the interview.
Right.
It often felt like he was being evasive, like avoiding directly answering.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
True, as you say. The perception out there is that the administration is quite unpopular, nothing uncharacteristic of any administration 2 years after an election, especially an administration that came into office in the backdrop of a very dilapidated economy.
So do you remember any specific promises that haven't been kept? Ones that would be interesting to our listeners.
Well, there's that free internet for young people that Ruto promised.
Wengi wenu mnaweza kuoperate mambo ya internet. Si kweli ama si kweli? Sinaona hiyo? Ile mnahitaji ni bundles, alafu mnaendesha mambo yenu mbele. Na tumesema ya kwamba hiyo bundles haitakuwa shida kwa sababu tutahakikisha kwamba kuna free internet in every ward.
Vile tulitengeneza last mile ya stima, sasa tutafanya last mile ya internet.
Oh, right.
That was a big one.
Yeah, and what about that investigation into cronyism? Was that supposed to happen right after you took office?
Still nothing on that.
Huh.
And another one is that they haven't ratified the International Convention Against Enforced Disappearances.
Said he would ratify the International Convention Against Enforced Disappearances. He has not. I could go on and on. Kenyans are frustrated because they were lied to during the election campaign.
Well, Mehdi, as I told you, that is the perspective of Mzalendo. And that is their target.
Well, has he ratified the International Convention Against Enforced Disappearances?
We have ratified very many international conventions.
But has he ratified the International Convention Against Enforced? He said he would do it straight as he comes to power. It's been 2.5 years. He could do it with a stroke of his pen. Why has he not done it?
He is yet to ratify, but it is
what are we waiting for?
Work in progress. Was there a timeline for its ratification, according to Mzalendo?
Oh, yeah.
Which was another big promise
It seems like hope is fading.
for a lot of Kenyans.
Yeah, and it makes the government's response to these protests even more disturbing.
The protests against the rising cost of living.
Right.
Yeah.
We're talking about allegations of police brutality, violent crackdowns.
It's really concerning. Reuters did an investigation.
Oh, wow.
And found instances where police allegedly killed protesters and then tried to cover it up.
It's scary to even think about.
Yeah.
And there were those two young men, Charles Eno and Shaquille Oban, who were shot during protests.
Right.
And their deaths were officially reported as road accidents.
Yes. Even though
they were shot in the head and the neck.
Yeah.
Ichung'wah tried to downplay the violence
He did.
in the interview.
Yeah. He claimed that only 3 police officers have been prosecuted.
3.
Yeah.
Seems so low.
It does, doesn't it?
Given all the protests and the number of allegations.
Yeah, there's a big discrepancy between what Ichung'wah is saying and what human rights groups are reporting.
Right, so it makes you question the accountability.
Within the police force, for sure.
And it's not just the protests.
No.
This lack of accountability seems to be everywhere in Kenyan politics right now.
It really does. And maybe the most obvious example of that is the abductions.
The enforced disappearances
Yeah.
that are happening in Kenya.
It's really troubling, people just disappearing.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
I wonder what that does to everyday life in Kenya.
Oh, it creates a climate of fear, for sure.
Like, are people looking over their shoulders all the time?
Definitely.
Wow.
Amnesty International has been documenting these cases.
Oh.
And the details are horrifying.
Really?
There's one case, this person was abducted just for posting satirical cartoons online.
Satirical cartoons?
Yeah.
That's crazy. What happened?
Well, according to Amnesty International, they were stripped naked,
Oh my gosh.
shaved, and interrogated.
Just for posting cartoons online.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It makes you wonder about freedom of expression in Kenya.
It really does.
And let me tell you, Mehdi,
okay.
let me tell you, because it's all politics.
Even the abduction of his son is politics.
It is all politics. It's playing politics with a very unfortunate incident.
Let's bring in our panel now to see what they think about all of this. I'm going to go first to Ichung'wah Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Ichung'wah, your organization has been documenting a lot of these abductions. You yourself, I believe, have spoken to some of the abductees and their families. Kimani suggests that this is kind of water under the bridge. There's no real evidence for now. A lot of it is politics. What's your view?
I mean, I think there has been a trend of targeting dissent, people who have protested in our streets, excessive use of force against people essentially just expressing the right to assembly. And in one case, for example, this young man was essentially held incommunicado. He was stripped naked. He was shaved, not just on top of his head, but in his pubic areas. He was interrogated ad nauseum about who his connections were, and all he had done was to post cartoons and artificially generated images onto the on his Twitter handle.
Images of what, can I ask?
Of the president in a casket.
Is that appropriate? Somebody makes fun of the president in Kenya and they get tortured like this?
When William Ruto became president, when the buck stopped at his desk, he took decisive action to end the extrajudicial killings that were happening. True, what Ichung'wah says is true. There was a case of about, I don't know if there were 3 or 4 young Kenyans who were allegedly abducted, and it went out that
Not allegedly. They were abducted.
They were abducted, as it was reported.
Remember what Ichung'wah said when Hassan asked him about the abductions?
You kind of brush it off, right?
Yeah, he implied people were making it up.
Like for attention.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
said they were locking themselves in Airbnbs with their girlfriends and hiding.
Oh my God.
It was so dismissive.
Yeah, and insensitive.
Especially given the trauma that these victims are going through.
And it's especially jarring when you think about the former Attorney General's son
Oh, yeah.
being abducted.
Right,
That's
yeah.
not something you could just brush off as a publicity stunt.
Exactly. And Justin Muturi,
The former Attorney General.
yes, he says he had to go directly to President Ruto to get his son released.
Wow.
And he even implied that the intelligence services were involved.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and Ruto himself has stayed silent. But Ichung'wah has actually come out and said that Muturi is lying
Really.
and that he's on his way out of the government.
So it's getting pretty messy.
Very messy.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who's really in control and who's being held accountable.
Yeah, it does.
So we've talked about all these broken promises,
Right.
the concerning response to the protests,
Yes.
and now these abductions.
Right.
Was there anything in the interview where the Ruto administration seemed to be doing well?
Well, one of the panelists, Moses Langit, he actually helped write Ruto's manifesto.
Oh. And he argued that they've made some strides with the economy.
Really?
Yeah. He highlighted their efforts to increase domestic production and reduce the cost of living.
Okay.
He even compared it to what Biden's doing in the U.S.
Interesting comparison. But are Kenyans actually feeling the benefits of these economic policies?
That's the thing. Lungat admitted that even though the economy might be doing better,
Yeah.
the public doesn't seem to agree.
Huh.
It's like people aren't feeling the positive impact in their daily lives.
I see.
So you have to wonder if maybe these economic arguments are a distraction from all these human rights violations.
It's hard to say for sure.
It is.
But it's something to think about.
For sure.
So besides Lunga, were there any other voices in the interview that gave good insights?
Oh, yeah. Professor Owino Okesh.
Okay.
She's a specialist in feminist and security studies.
Okay.
She made a really insightful point about the trust deficit
The trust deficit.
between the Ruto administration and the Kenyan people.
What does she mean by that? Well, she explained that citizens are always evaluating the government.
Yeah.
Like, we're all participating in ongoing performance reviews of our elected officials.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It really highlights the need for accountability.
Right.
So did Professor Okech talk about anything else besides the trust deficit?
Yes, she also pushed back on Ichung'wah's claim that institutions are working effectively in Kenya.
Oh, right.
She said if the government's so sure that the police and intelligence agencies aren't behind the abductions,
Right.
then they should investigate and tell the public who is responsible.
That's a really good point.
It is.
It's not enough to just deny it.
Yeah, you have to be transparent.
And accountable.
Exactly.
And Ichung'wah Houghton, the Amnesty International Kenya guy, he made a good point about the human cost
Oh, yeah.
of all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the political drama
Right.
and forget that these events are affecting real people.
Absolutely.
So did Houghton offer any suggestions for how to fix things?
He said there needs to be independent investigations
Okay.
into the police brutality and the abductions.
And then what?
Prosecute the people who are responsible,
Yeah.
no matter who they are,
Okay.
and reform the police.
Wow, those are some pretty big asks.
There.
Do you think the Ruto administration is going to do any of that?
I don't know. Based on the interview, it's hard to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Ichung'wah seemed more interested in defending things as they are than acknowledging that things need to change.
Well, hopefully the international community is paying attention and will put pressure on the Kenyan government
I hope so.
to make some changes.
Yeah, because if they don't, things could get a lot worse.
For Kenya and the region,
Right.
it's pretty wild, you know?
Yeah.
The Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project ranked Kenya among the most corrupt countries.
Yeah, and there's that U.S. government report, too.
Oh, yeah, the one that criticizes Kenya for not implementing their anti-corruption laws.
Exactly.
It makes you think about Ruto's whole hustler image.
Right. How does that fit in with all this?
Can you remind me what that hustler thing was all about?
Ruto wanted to show he was a self-made man.
Yeah.
Someone who understood the average Kenyan.
Okay.
And he made a point of being different from those political dynasties.
The ones that have controlled Kenya for so long.
Right.
But now he's got luxury hotels and a huge farm.
And a poultry plant.
It's a pretty big change from where he started.
It is.
Makes you wonder how he got all that wealth.
Yeah, it does.
I keep thinking about that part in the interview when Ichung'wah was talking about his own money.
Oh, yeah. He's worth like $7 million.
Yeah, and he said something like,
The day I make it, I fake it till I make it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's common saying, I guess, but it just seemed kind of tone deaf.
Yeah, given everything else going on.
And all the corruption allegations.
It definitely made me raise an eyebrow.
Like, is there really a difference between what the government says and what's actually happening?
That's the question, isn't it?
And then there's the whole international criminal court thing.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget about that.
Ruto was indicted for his role in the 2007 violence,
Right, even though the charges were dropped eventually.
but it's still part of his past.
It is, and Amnesty International wants some kind of international involvement.
To make sure people are held accountable for human rights abuses.
Right, and with all that going on,
It's easy to imagine the ICC coming back into the picture.
Ichung'wah Houghton even mentioned that possibility.
He did.
Yeah, he said if Kenya doesn't fix things, the ICC might have to step in.
Wow.
It sounds like a warning.
Yeah, like the world is watching.
Exactly.
So it seems like Kenya's at a crossroads.
It really does.
Will Ruto actually do something about all these problems?
That's the big question.
Or will things just keep getting worse?
And maybe lead to even more instability and international intervention.
It's hard to know what's going to happen.
It is. Ichung'wah didn't seem too interested in changing anything.
He kept blaming everything on perception.
Right, like Kenyans are just imagining all these problems.
But that seems kind of risky.
Oh, definitely.
Like ignoring real problems could just make people even angrier.
Exactly.
So what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from all of this?
I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about politics. This is about people's lives.
Their safety, their freedom.
Yeah, and the choices Ruto makes will have a huge impact.
On Kenya's future.
For sure.
Well said.
Yeah.
So for all of you listening, pay attention to what's going on in Kenya. Stay informed, because what happens there,
It matters.
it matters for everyone, not just Kenyans.
The whole world is connected.
And that's it for this deep dive.
Keep diving.